A test like no other. Professor Xilax's crystalline appendages shimmered under the Academy's quantum lights as he surveyed the assembled students. Standing at the heart of the evaluation chamber, his multifaceted eyes reflected the nervous faces of the most promising young minds from across the galaxy. Today would mark either their greatest triumph or their most humbling failure. Maya Rodriguez stood among them, her dark eyes steady despite being the only human in the room. Around her, beings of various forms and evolutionary paths shifted nervously. The serpentine draconids with their iridescent scales, the ethereal luminary who seemed to float inches above the ground, and the crystalline Nexusians whose bodies resembled living geometric patterns. The impossible chamber, Professor Xilax announced, his voice resonating through their neural interfaces, has never been conquered in its 300 cycles of existence. It is not merely a test of strength, intelligence, or skill. It is a test of adaptation itself. His crystalline form pulsed with waves of deep blue energy as he spoke, a sign of his intense focus. Maya felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. She had heard the whispers since her arrival at the elite Galactic Academy 3 months ago. Humans were considered primitive by most species, barely having mastered interstellar travel. Her acceptance had caused quite the controversy, with some faculty members openly questioning whether Earth's species was ready for advanced galactic education. The rules are simple, Xilax continued, gesturing to the massive chamber behind him. Its walls seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. You will be placed in an adaptive prison environment. Your goal is to either escape or endure for 24 standard hours. The chamber will react to your attempts at freedom, learning and evolving to counter your strategies. You may use any natural abilities or knowledge at your disposal. A draconid student named Kex flexed his massive claws, scales rippling with confidence. The luminary twins, Astra and Nova, exchanged knowing glances. Their psychic abilities were legendary even among their own kind. Maya remained still, observing, analyzing. You will enter individually, each facing the unique configuration of the chamber, Xilax explained. Your performance will be evaluated not just on success or failure, but on your approach to an impossible situation. His gaze lingered on Maya for a moment longer than the others. The selection process began. One by one, students were led into different entrances of the chamber. Maya watched as Kex strode in confidently, and minutes later heard the distant sound of frustrated roaring. His brute force approach clearly meeting resistance. The luminary twins entered simultaneously, despite being assigned different doors, likely attempting to maintain their psychic link. The chamber's walls pulsed with an odd frequency, and Maya suspected it was already working to disrupt their connection. Finally, it was her turn. The entrance before her morphed into a simple archway, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Professor Xilax approached her, his crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the floor. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his tone neutral but curious. "Many of my colleagues believe your presence here is a mistake. They argue that humanity lacks the necessary evolution for our advanced studies." He paused, studying her reaction. "I, however, find your species fascinating. You've survived and thrived despite lacking almost every advantage enjoyed by the other races here. I look forward to seeing how you approach this challenge." Maya stepped through the archway without responding. She didn't need to prove humanity's worth with words. Actions would speak far louder. The moment she entered, the entrance sealed behind her, its surface becoming indistinguishable from the rest of the chamber's walls. The space around her was both vast and claustrophobic, with corridors that seemed to extend infinitely yet gave the impression of closing in. The walls pulsed with a faint, rhythmic pattern, like the breathing of some vast organism. The air itself felt charged with potential energy, ready to respond to her every move. Maya took a deep breath and smiled. While the others would rely on their evolutionary advantages, strength, psychic powers, natural abilities, she had something they didn't: the human capacity for recognizing patterns, and more importantly, the ability to think outside of them. She began to walk, her steps deliberate but unpredictable, already forming a theory about the nature of this impossible chamber. The first test was about to begin, and Maya was ready to show the galaxy exactly what humanity could do, breaking the rules of reality. The chamber's walls rippled like mercury as Maya made her way deeper into the labyrinth. Unlike her fellow students, whose attempts at escape echoed through the structure, crashes, energy bursts, and psychic pulses, she moved in near silence, observing the environment's subtle responses to her presence. Every few meters, thin lines of energy crawled across the surfaces around her, forming intricate patterns before dissolving back into the metallic sheen. Most would dismiss these as decorative or intimidation tactics, but Maya recognized them as something far more significant. They were calculations made visible, the chamber's processing system revealing itself through minute imperfections. A distant roar echoed through the structure, followed by the sound of something massive impacting against the chamber's walls. Kex, the Draconid, was obviously still attempting to breach the prison through sheer force. The walls around Maya trembled slightly, and she noticed how the energy patterns intensified in the direction of the disturbance. "You're not just adapting," she whispered, running her fingers along the wall. "You're learning, redistributing resources to counter perceived threats." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. But what happens when a threat doesn't follow predictable patterns? Maya reached into her pocket and removed a small metal stylus, a basic writing tool allowed to students during the test. She began tapping it against the wall in an irregular rhythm, deliberately avoiding any pattern that could be easily predicted or countered. The energy lines near her hand became erratic, struggling to form their usual clean patterns. Somewhere above her, she heard the familiar harmonic resonance of the luminary twins attempting to synchronize their psychic abilities. The chamber's response was immediate, a low-frequency hum that Maya felt more than heard, designed to disrupt their mental connection. The walls around her briefly displayed a complex series of calculations as the system divided its attention between multiple threats. That's when she saw it, a momentary glitch in the chamber's surface, barely lasting a fraction of a second. Most species wouldn't have noticed it, their senses either too specialized or too enhanced to catch such a subtle flaw. But human eyes, evolved to detect movement and pattern irregularities for survival, caught the brief distortion. Maya began walking in a deliberately irregular pattern. 3 steps forward, 1 to the side, 2 backward, then a sudden sprint followed by complete stillness. With each unpredictable movement, the chamber's responses became increasingly erratic. The energy patterns started to stutter and jump, like a computer struggling to process too many conflicting inputs. "Fascinating," a voice echoed through the chamber. Professor Xilax, observing from somewhere outside. "You're not attempting to overcome the chamber's defenses at all, are you, Miss Rodriguez?" Maya didn't respond, maintaining her focus on the task at hand. She had seen something like this before, back on Earth, during her internship at a quantum computing facility. When a system was designed to learn and adapt, it required baseline parameters, expectations about how its targets would behave. But what happened when those expectations were continuously violated? The chamber shuddered again, more violently this time, as Kex apparently launched another assault on its walls. Maya felt the entire structure reconfiguring itself, reinforcing the area under attack. But this time, she noticed something crucial. The energy patterns around her dimmed slightly, as if the system was redistributing power to deal with the more obvious threat. She increased the irregularity of her movements, adding spinning and random gestures to her repertoire. The chamber's responses became increasingly delayed, its calculations visible for longer periods as it struggled to predict and counter her behavior. The glitches in the walls began to appear more frequently, lasting longer each time. A high-pitched tone suddenly filled the air. The chamber's warning system. Maya's methods were causing the system to behave in ways its creators hadn't anticipated. The walls around her began to flicker more intensely, sections of their surface becoming temporarily transparent before snapping back into solidity. "Remarkable." Tylax's voice came again, this time with a note of genuine surprise. "You're not trying to break out of the chamber, Miss Rodriguez. You're trying to break the chamber itself." Maya finally allowed herself a full smile. The professor had grasped part of her strategy, but not its full implications. She wasn't just trying to break the system. She was teaching it something about humanity that these advanced species had failed to understand. Sometimes the most effective approach wasn't to overpower, outsmart, or outmaneuver an obstacle. Sometimes the best strategy was to simply make it impossible for the system to predict what you would do next. And humans, with their chaotic creativity and inherent unpredictability, were masters of exactly that. The power of chaos. The chamber's warning tones had shifted from a high-pitched whine to a deep, pulsing drone that seemed to vibrate through Maya's bones. Around her, the walls had begun to display increasingly erratic behavior. Sections would become transparent, then opaque, then seemingly vanish altogether before snapping back into existence. Her strategy of intentional chaos was working better than she'd anticipated. Through one of the momentary transparent sections, she caught a glimpse of Kex, the Draconid student, his massive form now slumped against a wall, scales dulled with exhaustion. The chamber had successfully worn down even his incredible physical strength. In another section, she saw one of the luminary twins, Astra or Nova, she couldn't tell which, floating in a meditative stance, likely trying to find a way around the chamber's psychic dampening field. "Your approach is causing unprecedented stress on the system." Professor Xilax's voice echoed through the chamber, carrying a note of what might have been concern. "The chamber's adaptive algorithms are approaching a critical threshold." Maya continued her erratic movements, but now with even more complexity. She began humming an old Earth song, deliberately off-key and with random changes in tempo. She moved her arms in flowing patterns that seemed to suggest meaning but contained none. Each action was calculated to be as unpredictable as possible, while appearing to follow some incomprehensible logic. The memory of her grandfather's chess lessons floated through her mind. He had taught her that the strongest players could sometimes be defeated not by superior skill, but by moves so seemingly illogical that they disrupted all standard strategies. In chaos, he had said, even masters can lose their way. The chamber's walls suddenly rippled violently, and Maya heard something she hadn't expected: laughter. It was coming from Professor Xilax, but it had an edge of amazement to it. "Do you understand what she's doing?" she heard him say, apparently speaking to someone else outside the chamber. "The human isn't trying to defeat the chamber's defenses. She's overloading its prediction matrices with behavior it can't categorize. It's brilliant in its simplicity." Maya allowed herself a small smile as she continued her performance of calculated insanity. The chamber systems had been designed to learn and adapt to any escape attempt, but its fundamental programming assumed that those attempts would follow logical patterns. Even the most physically powerful or psychically gifted students would still act according to predictable strategies based on their abilities. But humans had evolved on a planet where survival often meant doing the unexpected. Their greatest strength wasn't any particular physical or mental advantage, but rather their ability to act in ways that defied conventional logic while still maintaining an underlying purpose. The chamber shuddered again, more violently this time. The energy patterns that had been so orderly when she entered were now a chaos of conflicting signals, like a system trying to solve an equation with too many variables. Through the increasingly frequent transparent sections, Maya could see other students noticing the chamber's unusual behavior. Some had stopped their escape attempts to watch the walls around them dissolving into uncertainty. "The chamber's primary matrix is approaching collapse," Xilax announced, his voice carrying a mixture of concern and fascination. "Miss Rodriguez, I must warn you that continuing this approach could result in a complete system failure. The safety protocols." Maya cut him off by breaking into an old Earth dance routine, complete with exaggerated movements and randomly interjected martial arts stances. The chamber's response was immediate and dramatic. Entire sections of wall began to phase in and out of existence, the energy patterns becoming so erratic They looked like lightning storms trapped in metal. She felt the moment approaching, the point where the chamber's adaptive systems would be forced to make a critical choice: either shut down completely, admitting defeat, or risk a catastrophic failure trying to process and counter her unpredictable behavior. The drone had risen to a fever pitch, and the very air seemed to crackle with unstable energy. That's when Maya saw it, a patch of complete darkness in the wall to her left, a spot where the chamber's projection had failed entirely. It wasn't just a glitch or a temporary malfunction. She had created a blind spot in the system, a point where the predictive algorithms had broken down so completely that they had ceased to function at all. The chamber wasn't just failing. It was beginning to tear itself apart in its desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless. And in that moment, Maya understood something profound about humanity's place in the galaxy. Their greatest strength wasn't their ability to overpower, outsmart, or adapt to their environment. It was their ability to make the environment adapt to them, even if that meant breaking it in the process, unraveling the code. The patch of darkness in the chamber's wall had grown, spreading like ink through water. Maya stood before it, her heart pounding with equal parts excitement and apprehension. She'd created more than just a malfunction. She'd torn a hole in what they'd all assumed was an impenetrable system. Fascinating. Professor Dilax's voice carried a new tone now, one of revelation. You've discovered something that none of us anticipated, Miss Rodriguez. Something that challenges everything we thought we knew about adaptive systems. The chamber's walls were now in a state of constant flux, rippling and shifting like the surface of a disturbed pond. Through the increasingly frequent transparent sections, Maya could see that all the other students had stopped their escape attempts. They were watching the chamber's deterioration with a mixture of awe and confusion. Kex, the Draconid, pressed his scaled hand against a wavering wall, his earlier frustration replaced by curiosity. "The human," he rumbled, his voice carrying through the destabilizing barriers. "She's not fighting the chamber at all. She's teaching it something." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure if the others could see her. She understood now why the chamber was failing, and more importantly, why Professor Dilax had seemed so interested in her approach from the beginning. The test had never been about escaping the prison. It had been about understanding its true nature. "Your species," Dilax continued, "has always been an anomaly in our studies. Other races evolved clear advantages: strength, speed, psychic abilities, natural defenses. But humans evolved something far more interesting: the ability to defy prediction itself." The darkness was spreading faster now, creating a network of void-like cracks throughout the chamber structure. The energy patterns that had once been so orderly were now a cascade of conflicting signals, like a computer trying to divide by zero endlessly. "The chamber," Maya spoke for the first time since entering. "It's not just a prison, is it? It's a research tool. You're not testing our ability to escape. You're studying how different species approach impossible problems." A sound like crystal chimes filled the air. Dilax's version of laughter. "Very good, Miss Rodriguez. For 300 cycles, we've used the impossible chamber to study problem-solving across species. The Draconids taught us about persistence, the Luminary about the boundaries of psychic influence, the Nexusians about the limits of logical progression. But humans showed us something entirely new." The chamber shuddered violently, and Maya saw that the patches of darkness were beginning to converge. The system wasn't just failing. It was reorganizing itself in response to her actions, trying to find a new way to function that could account for the unpredictable. "Your species lacks the physical advantages of the Draconids, the psychic powers of the Luminary, the natural computational abilities of the Nexusians," Dilax continued. "Yet you've achieved something none of them could. You've forced the chamber to evolve beyond its original parameters." Maya watched as the energy patterns began to form new configurations she hadn't seen before. The chamber wasn't just adapting to her actions anymore. It was learning to embrace uncertainty, to function without the need for perfect prediction. "That's why you wanted a human in the program," Maya realized. "Not to test us, but to learn from us. to understand how we turn our limitations into advantages. The darkness had spread to cover nearly half the chamber now, but instead of continuing to grow, it had begun to pulse with a new kind of energy. The chamber wasn't breaking down anymore. It was transforming. "Your species' greatest strength," Silax said, his voice filled with academic excitement, "is not your adaptability, but your ability to force adaptation in others. You don't simply overcome challenges. You change the very nature of the systems you encounter." The remaining students watched in amazement as the chamber's walls began to stabilize, but not by returning to their original state. Instead, they took on a new form, one that seemed to flow and shift naturally, no longer trying to maintain rigid control. Maya understood then what she had really accomplished. She hadn't beaten the chamber by escaping it or enduring it. She had transformed it into something entirely new, something that could exist in harmony with chaos rather than trying to control it. And in doing so, she had demonstrated why humanity, despite all its apparent limitations, had earned its place among the stars. Victory through innovation. The transformed chamber pulsed with a new kind of energy, neither chaotic nor ordered but something in between. The walls that had once been solid and unyielding now flowed like liquid crystal, responding to thought and movement with an almost organic fluidity. Maya stood at the center of it all, watching as her impossible solution rewrote the rules of what was possible. Professor Xilax's crystalline form materialized through one of the chamber's newly permeable walls, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the shifting patterns of energy around them. The other students gathered as well, Kex with his battle-worn scales, the luminary twins still radiating residual psychic energy, and the others who had struggled against the chamber's original parameters. "In 300 cycles," Xilax announced, his voice carrying a note of profound satisfaction, "no one has ever approached the chamber quite like this. Most tried to overcome its defenses. Some attempted to outlast them. But you, Miss Rodriguez, did something unprecedented. You helped it evolve." Maya watched as the darkness she had created began to integrate with the chamber's remaining systems, creating something entirely new. "I realized that the chamber wasn't our adversary," she explained. "It was a learning system. And like any learning system, it could be taught new ways of thinking." Kex moved closer, his massive form casting shifting shadows in the chamber's transformed light. "But how did you know this would work? That chaos would force evolution rather than destruction." Maya smiled, remembering countless moments from Earth's history that had prepared her for this challenge. "Because that's the story of human progress. We've never been the strongest, fastest, or most naturally gifted species, but we've always excelled at creating change, not just in ourselves, but in everything we interact with." "Indeed," Silax agreed, his crystalline form pulsing with academic excitement. "Your species has consistently demonstrated a remarkable ability to transform limitations into advantages. When you couldn't fly, you built machines that could. When you couldn't survive in space, you engineered environments that allowed it. You don't just adapt to your environment. You make the environment adapt to you." The chamber had now stabilized into its new form, one that no longer sought to contain or control, but rather to collaborate and create. The walls displayed complex, ever-changing patterns that somehow managed to be both unpredictable and harmonious. "The true test," Silax continued, addressing all the students, "was never about escape or endurance. It was about understanding the nature of adaptation itself. Each of you approached this challenge according to your species' evolutionary advantages. But Miss Rodriguez showed us something more valuable. She demonstrated that true innovation often comes not from using our strengths, but from transforming our perceived weaknesses into new kinds of strength." The luminary twins exchanged glances, their natural telepathy allowing them to process this revelation in unison. "So the chamber," Astra began, "was designed to fail." Nova finished. "Not to fail," Maya corrected, running her hand along a flowing wall. "To evolve." The professor wasn't testing our ability to beat the system. He was studying how different species might contribute to its development. Each approach, even those that didn't succeed in traditional terms, taught the chamber something new about the nature of intelligence and adaptation. Tylax's form brightened with approval. Precisely. And this understanding will prove crucial as our various species continue to interact and develop. The galaxy's future depends not on any one species' natural advantages, but on our ability to learn from each other's unique approaches to problem solving. The chamber's new configuration had begun to stabilize, its walls now displaying a perfect blend of order and chaos, structure and spontaneity. It was no longer just a prison or a test. It had become a testament to the power of unexpected solutions. Your acceptance into the academy. Tylax addressed Maya directly, was questioned by many who saw only humanity's limitations. But you have demonstrated why your species has earned its place among the stars. It's not your technology, your physical capabilities, or even your intelligence that makes humans remarkable. It's your ability to transform the very nature of the challenges you face. Maya looked around at her fellow students, seeing in their expressions a new understanding of humanity's potential contribution to galactic society. They had entered the chamber as competitors, each trying to prove their species' superiority. They emerged as colleagues, having learned a profound lesson about the true nature of progress and innovation. The chamber's walls parted, creating an exit that hadn't existed before. As they walked out together, Maya realized that she had done more than just pass a test. She had helped bridge the gap between human and alien understanding, showing that sometimes the most powerful solutions come not from overwhelming strength or superior ability, but from the willingness to embrace uncertainty and transform it into opportunity. In the end, the ultimate test had proved something that humanity had always known in their hearts, that their greatest strength lay not in what they could do, but in what they could inspire others to become.